A lot of young people are realizing that the stuff they've been fed in K-12 and at the university is wrong.
Do we need this massive government? Is this an example of why it needs to shrink?
Your average family does not spend more money than it takes in. The least we can ask of our government is that they do the same thing. This is the greatest country in the world when it comes to having the most opportunity to lift yourself up from poverty. Yet these schools want to teach kids that America exists to hold people down. It's nonsense.
Why is there a need for an organization to sue the government?
I get asked that question pretty frequently, and there's more than one answer to that question, but more than anything else, we've seen over the last several decades the government become more and more of a coercive force as opposed to a force for good. And we see it at all levels of government, whether it's the local level, school district level, national level, state level. And we've seen a government overreach that has extended into every aspect of people's lives, whether you're dealing with healthcare freedom issues, free speech issues, property rights, parental rights, school choice. The government has felt a compulsion to interject itself into every area of Americans' lives. And it shouldn't. Frankly, the way this country was designed and the way this country should be is the smallest, most limited form of government, and it's gone in the opposite direction. So now, more than ever, it is important to sue the government, to pass legislation to roll back the powers of the government, and to give the power back to the people. And that's what the Goldwater Institute does. Every issue that we are focused on is about getting the government out of people's lives, whether it's through legislation or whether it's through litigation.
Do you think the founders, when they started the American experiment, ever thought there would be organizations like Goldwater, like Liberty Justice Center, like Institute for Justice, who would be filing lawsuits every single day in state capitals across the country?
Well, I don't believe the founders thought that the government would become as big and overreaching as it has become. But the founding fathers were big proponents of shaking things up. I mean, they literally did a revolutionary war to get away from England. And so they were big believers in shaking things up. I think they would be very proud and happy with the work that free market think tanks and free market organizations are doing. But I think they would be appalled at the size and scope of government today.
Can you define what is a free market think tank for me? Do they
Sure.
do a lot of thinking, or are you guys making action?
Well, at Goldwater, the one thing that we do not do is just sit around talking about issues. We don't just sit around and write white papers. We do a tremendous amount of original research, but all of that research is geared towards the idea of actually changing public policy. So ultimately, what we do and what all of our efforts are geared to is actually changing policy, and that can be done through the courtroom or it can be done at the Capitol. And we work in state capitals across the country. So we're based in Arizona. We do a lot of work out here. We do work across the country. And just to give you an idea of what that looks like, this past year, we worked in 43 states. So we ran actually over 100 pieces of legislation around the country. At any given time, we're working on 100 plus lawsuits across the country. And so far this year, we've scored over 50 victories on behalf of average Americans, both legislatively and litigation victories.
What's your top success from this year? You said you've got 50, a metric of 50 on the scoreboard.
Sure.
What kind of qualified that for me?
Well, I'm not sure that I would say there was just one big success, but I'll mention a couple of real big issues. And one of the things that we've seen really be attacked from the left is the idea of school choice. And just to give you an example, a few years ago out here in Arizona, we passed a universal school choice bill. And what that means is that parents can use their own tax dollars to send their kid to whatever school best fits that kid's needs. Seems like common sense. We poll the issue. It polls through the roof. Everyone agrees with it. Well, our governor does not agree with it. And her budget, which she introduced right out of the gate this year, eviscerated school choice. So imagine we now have 100,000 kids taking advantage of universal school choice. She wanted to wipe that program away. We fought very hard. Program, I'm very happy to say, is still in place. But one of the great things about it is we've now been able to take that idea all across the country. So now, 3 years ago, Arizona was the only state that had a universal school choice program. Now there's 14. Plus, there's several other states that have some version of school choice. So that has definitely been a major issue. Another big issue that I'll mention is dealing with healthcare freedom. I think most Americans would agree there are some serious flaws in our healthcare system in this country. And one of the biggest flaws is access to life-saving treatments. So a handful of years back, we worked on a measure called the right to try. And the concept was very simple. It was patients should be able to get access to medications that had not gone through the full FDA approval process. And it's interesting, when we looked into it, the FDA approval process had not been changed since 1965. So imagine 50 some years, despite all the technological advances across the country, and we were still using the same antiquated process to get treatments to patients. So we decided, let's use federalism. Let's take a state-based approach, pass this type of measure across the country that says, no, you can access these medications. We were very successful, passed it in 41 states, and then ultimately took it to the federal government in 2018. At that time, that was during President Trump's first term. He signed it into law. Huge success, has now treated literally hundreds of thousands of patients across the country. And right now, we're now working on Right to Try 2.0, which takes that concept and applies it to individualized treatment. So things like stem cell treatments and the type of things where you use your genomics to treat rare diseases. And that is, in all likelihood, going to be the future of medicine, not cookie cutter approach, but individualized treatments. So we've passed that this past 2 years in 16 states, and we're planning on taking that to the federal level here in early 2026.
Do you think the federal government is withholding the cure to cancer?
Well, no, I don't think that the federal government is withholding a cure to cancer, but I don't think they are advancing treatments that have shown to have efficacy for certain types of patients. And so, and for each patient is different. And so if you can create a type of treatment using medicines and genomics that can help a particular person, that person should not be blocked from that treatment. And unfortunately, right now, it is hard for individuals, particularly with rare diseases, to get access to these types of treatments.
So the patients you guys have worked with more as ambassadors, Victor, because I know Jordan McGlynn, he was a young boy, had muscular dystrophy. He was actually one that I saw in a press conference, was sitting on Trump's lap during the federal signing of the
Yes.
bill. Um, Kids like him that are at Phoenix Children's Hospital right now waiting on these treatments. Are you guys talking with those families and hearing more of their stories, or what's your connection to that side?
Yeah. We do a lot of work with patients. In fact, every year we actually give what we call the Goldwater Freedom Award to someone who has really been beneficial in moving ideas and creating a grassroots movement. And this year we gave it to a young man named Elijah. He's suffering from Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. It's a very aggressive disease. Unfortunately, the lifespan is usually into the mid-20s. He's done a tremendous amount of work. He's frankly done more advocacy in his life than most of us do in a lifetime. So we awarded him with the Goldwater Freedom Award. But those are the type of patients we do a lot of work with, these patients with terminal illnesses. But I use the term terminal somewhat loosely because there are treatments out there that can, at a minimum, extend their life and potentially even cure some of these diseases. But we work very closely with the patient community.
Okay. When we think about right to try, one thing that comes to mind is a lot of other countries allow for euthanasia. If you're a 79-year-old man, you've been battling cancer for 10 years, at some point, you may just want to call it quits, which sounds awful. But why does the United States not allow that?
Well, I don't know the answer to that, and that it's not an area that we've gotten involved with. Our focus is on trying to make sure patients have access to life-saving treatment. So we have never gotten involved in the sort of right to die area. But I do think in general there are a lot of treatment options happening across the globe that are not available in America, and there really is no good reason why treatments can be available in places like Europe, Japan, Israel, and not available here in America.
Yeah.
And in fact, a number of the patients we've worked with actually had to leave the country just to get treatments for their diseases. And you think, how crazy is that?
Who can afford it?
Yes,
Yeah.
but most people can't. And in America, you should not have to fly to Great Britain to get a treatment that has been approved out there for the past decade.
Switching back to school choice. School choice, in my mind, that's such a sexy term for politicians. They love to use it whenever they're running for office. I believe in school choice. And originally, my interpretation of school choice is, as you said, I want my child to get the best education possible for their ability, whatever that may be. Now, I think the term school choice is starting to change because you have a little bit of this indoctrination going on in K 12 education where, okay, now we're being taught about various sexual identities. Now, parents are being closed out of the loop and children are getting gender reassignment surgery. I know another client of mine in California, they have a coalition of parents where one of their daughters requested a binder from her teacher for her breasts, and she was wearing that for a year. And then they had to transition her back. And so school choice in my mind is turning into this whole different conversation rather than not let's teach mathematics, let's beat China, let's get ahead of the game against these other countries. Now it's more of a cultural happening, at least from my perspective. Is Goldwater weighing in on that? I know you guys do some DEI work,
Yes.
but at the K-12 level, can you speak to that a little bit, Victor?
Absolutely. And I think you make a very good point. If there is anything positive that came out of the COVID shutdowns, it was that parents were forced to see what was actually happening in their classrooms because, of course, all the public sector unions said we are not going to send our teachers back into these classrooms. In fact, the union out here in Arizona said we're not sending our teachers back until COVID is eradicated, not even gotten under control, but eradicated.
Oh.
But the benefit of that was that during that online learning, which was a disaster, by the way, kids fell even further behind. But the benefit was a lot of parents actually were paying attention to what was happening in the classrooms. They saw the sort of things being taught. They saw whether it's the DEI practices, the anti-American practices, the gender studies, the sort of things that most parents, I don't believe, think kids should be being taught in school. And just to put a kind of a finer point on it, every year we see our NAEP scores, and those are the national scores where we see how the United States is doing and how they're doing compared to the rest of the world. In the United States of America, only 30% of eighth graders are proficient in reading. And that actually looks real good when you compare it to our math proficiency or science proficiency. And so when you look at the industrialized world, America's at the bottom. And that should not be. Now, the great thing about school choice, whether you're talking about charter schools, private schools, homeschooling, whatever option that parent wants to take advantage of, when we see people using school choice, those numbers increase dramatically. So if you start looking at the private schools, charter schools, et cetera, they're dramatically outperforming the traditional public schools. And so it's very important, and I couldn't agree with you more. We should be focused on reading, math, science, competing in a global economy which is the economy of today and the economy of the future, and not focused on things like gender studies and trying to teach kids that America is a horrible country, which couldn't be further from the truth.
No, we're still the best country in the world by far.
There's no question about it. In fact, I think it's a great testament that we're still doing as well as we are, despite a failing public education system.
Because people often forget we're the youngest country in the world.
No question.
We're still learning. And I think we're going through a little bit of an identity crisis right now. But back to the school choice question, do you think it's more of a cultural decision now to say, I want a government-funded instructor to teach my child versus maybe a PhD, master's degree teacher who has decided to dedicate his or her life to teaching the best mathematics course possible in Arizona?
Yes, I think to a great extent that's accurate, and unfortunately, the curriculums being pushed by most traditional K-12 schools, not all, because I like to stress this, there are a lot of very good traditional K-12 schools. It's just on a whole, the curriculums being pushed by these schools are not effective in terms of teaching kids basic skills. They are effective, theoretically at least, at indoctrinating kids, but not at teaching them how to read and write. So I do think it's become a cultural fight especially in the minds of a lot of parents, where they're looking at their kids and do they want their kids to be able to succeed and compete with the rest of the world in the future, or do they just want them to be the most woke, indoctrinated kids on the planet? I think most parents want their kids to be able to compete. And by the way, I think that's why when we poll these questions, school choice polls around 80% when you're asking parents, should you have school choice? When we poll things like academic transparency, that is, should you get to see what's happening in your kid's classroom? Seems like a no-brainer, but the education unions adamantly oppose it. We poll these issues. They poll through the roof, and they poll across the board. Even people that describe themselves as socialists still say, yeah, I'd like to know what's happening in my kid's classroom.
What do you think they're hiding? Why would they not just say, hey, this is what we're teaching your child every day?
They're hiding the DEI curriculums.
Okay.
There's no question about it.
And what are the DEI curriculums?
They're curriculums focused around the idea that America has been a hostile force in the world, is not a force for good, is an inherently racist country that holds down low-income individuals. And of course, nothing could be further from the truth. This is the greatest country in the world when it comes to having the most opportunity to lift yourself up from poverty. And yet these schools want to teach kids that America exists to hold people down. It's nonsense.
The inherent curriculum of DEI really perpetuates that fact that you are racist. If you are a Caucasian male, especially, you're racist, you're a homophobe, everything is wrong with you. DEI is teaching people that now. I know a lot of colleagues of mine, those are conversations we're beginning to have of, okay, when you enter boardrooms now, do we need to make sure every single race, ethnicity, gender is represented? Well, doesn't that defeat competition in the United States and capitalism? Don't you want the best of the best working for your company? I think this is a real hot topic right now in America because this is where I think the core of racism is coming from. And the fact is that's coming from the government and the education system.
These people pushing this agenda do not agree with the concept of capitalism. And so I don't actually believe that they believe their own nonsense, but they do believe in taking down the system of capitalism and replacing it with a socialistic system. I mean, we see that in New York, the New York elections. The incoming mayor is an avowed socialist, and the things he's talking about are socialist ideas, and we see it coming from members of Congress and other places in the country. And so I do think it is designed to take down the concept of capitalism and replace it with a socialistic system, which of course always results in a few haves at the top of the system, and all the rest of us can live in little vertical hovels up in the sky.
Which is just insane to me because you see that theory being applied in so many other countries, and what ends up happening after, I don't know, a few months in, the U.S. come save me, please. Who's going to save us?
There is no system of socialism that has ever succeeded.
No.
And the left always argues, well, they didn't do it right. Well, they did. They did it exactly the way socialism is going to work, and it will always inevitably fail. And when you ask who's going to save us in this country, it's up to groups like Goldwater. It's up to free market organizations. It's up to elected officials to push back against this type of nonsense. And I think the tide is turning. I mean, we see in politics, we see things ebb and flow. And I'll give you an example. You know, when my first election that I voted in a presidential election, it was 1992. I was 20 years old. It was Bush Sr. against Clinton, and so it was a turning point in the country. You have the greatest generation. Up to that point, for 30 years, presidents had always come from that World War II generation against the baby boomer generation, and of course, Bill Clinton won that cycle, and it started shifting the politics in the country. But it also shifted things from a time where Republicans almost always had the presidency, Democrats always had Congress, to now they go back and forth. I mean, you look since 1992, over the past 30 some years, Congress has flipped multiple times. There's been both Republicans and Democrats in the White House. So these things ebb and flow. But I do think that amongst a lot of young people, and I think this is important, a lot of young people are realizing that the stuff they've been fed in K-12 and at the university level, and the universities are no better, and in some ways even worse than K-12, that what they've been fed is wrong, and it's not going to help them succeed as they move forward. So it is up to groups like Goldwater and others to not only get that word out there, which is important, but again, to actively litigate against the government when it oversteps its bounds, and to actively promote legislation to get the government out of our lives. Because ultimately, the government is the only entity that can force socialism upon us. We have to stop that from happening.
Goldwater is a 501c3, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so all contributions tax deductible.
Absolutely.
Participating in the political cycle, you guys can or cannot do that.
What we cannot do is endorse candidates.
Okay.
What we can do is endorse issues,
Okay.
and we do that all the time. So, as I mentioned earlier, we work in legislatures all across the country, including out here, and we actively promote issues. We actively promote litigation, but we cannot endorse or oppose candidates.
Is there a reason Goldwater has not launched a 501c4 or a PAC organization yet?
Well, for us, it really hasn't been necessary.
Okay.
In terms of the way nonprofit finances work, you can take an H election and then use funds to promote issues, which is what we want to do, is promote issues. And the way our budget is set up, it's easy for us to do that. So there really hasn't been any need to actually launch a C4.
Victor, what's the annual budget for Goldwater, expenses versus revenue?
Sure. Our annual budget is about $11.5 million.
Okay. And most of that is going into work where? Across the entire country, Arizona? What's kind of the breakdown? Because you guys are a nationally focused organization. When I say national, you're working state by state, which I think is a good difference to make compared to a lot of these other groups who may be working federally. You look at the states as the laboratories of democracy, which I always love that term that you would say.
Yeah. We absolutely believe that the states are the best place to move public policy. You know, the federal government works at best at a snail's pace. At the state level, you can pass bills with if you do the correct preparation and groundwork, you can actually get things done in a year, 2, 3 years, rather than a decade or longer. So we do believe working at the state level is the most effective way to do things. And so when I talk about our budget, those dollars are used across the country and our dollars go heavily into these programs. So legislation and litigation, we keep the administrative dollars very low, fundraising dollars very low. Fundraising is less than 4% of our entire budget.
That's excellent.
So we push that money into actually developing and moving public policy, and that's what our donors want to see.
So let's talk about fundraising for a minute.
Sure.
Obviously, you and I have a little bit of a history doing fundraising. A lot of the stories in my book, Funding Freedom, are from you and I actually meeting with these people.
Absolutely.
When you're going to meet with donors, what is the biggest issue you have to confront with them? Because an issue I see is, okay, do I want to fund a law firm? On its face, Goldwater could be viewed as a law firm, but you're so much more than that.
For sure.
Speak a little bit to how you're sitting across from John Doe billionaire, and I say, well, why would I fund you versus any other litigation center?
For sure. Well, the biggest difference, and you touched on it, is the state-based approach. Most litigation centers in the country are either fall into one of two categories. They focus on federal litigation, and we do some work in federal court. I mean, that's an inevitability. You want to pick your battles, but about 80% or so of our litigation is going to be at the state level, and then some of the other state-based litigation centers are limited to their own state. The difference between us and these other groups is we do work in all the states, all across the country, and one of the ways we're able to do that is we've actually set up an extensive network of pro bono attorneys that we've trained up over the years. These are attorneys that we work with, train. We have at least one pro bono attorney in every single state, and the larger states, of course, will have 10 or 20 attorneys in those states. So we have over 1,000 attorneys in that network. So there is literally no state that we can't go into and push litigation. And that is a big game changer and very different compared to the rest of the organizations out there.
$11.5 million is not a lot of money to be taking on such a task. You know, is the American Freedom Network how you're sort of strengthening your abilities, because those are pro bono hours they're donating,
yes.
Correctly?
Yeah, yes. Those are donated hours that those attorneys give to the cause, and it's interesting when we bring these attorneys in. You know, a lot of them are very seasoned attorneys, seasoned litigators. They work for major law firms. They have their own firm, but they also want to do stuff that is meaningful, and that's the pitch we make to these attorneys: is this is an opportunity to fight for property rights, fight for free speech, for healthcare freedom, parental rights, school choice. And for a lot of these guys, they just don't get to do that in their normal 9-to-5 jobs. So they relish the opportunity to go in there and do things that frankly make a bigger difference than maybe doing personal injury law.
Oh, yeah, I bet. It's probably a lot more exciting, too.
They enjoy it, for
Because
sure.
you get to sue your favorite politician. Goldwater's pretty good. You guys have a great track record.
No, thank you.
You know, the research I did before our meeting today, you've been winning, and you've been winning consistently. How are you communicating that to your donor base? Do they see that from you, or you're just trying to get the job done?
Well, first and foremost, we're always trying to get the job done, but we do share our victories with our donors. We stay in regular contact with them, and that's both direct contact, but also sending out emails and newsletters. We send out quarterly reports to donors so they can see here's where their dollars are going, here's what's happening. But yeah, we're very proud of the work that we're doing. And just to put it in perspective, we're actually on the litigation side of things. We're about to be in front of the Arizona Supreme Court for the 15th time. Wow. Which is more than any other state-based litigation center in the country in terms of their Supreme Court. And we're also in front of about half a dozen other Supreme Courts around the country. And so the work's gotten bigger and bigger. It's gotten more impactful. And really, we couldn't be more proud with the work that we've been doing across the country.
Oh, that's excellent. Victor, how many appearances have you all had in front of SCOTUS?
The United States Supreme Court. We've been in front of the United States Supreme Court on a couple of occasions, but for us, the vast majority of the Supreme Court cases are going to be state-based.
And you're usually able to settle the issue there. There hasn't been too many times where the state Supreme Court is unable to rule or rules and you guys appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. That doesn't happen too often?
No, it never happens. When you're going through the state court system, the state Supreme Court is the end point.
The final.
Now, like I said, we do occasionally do federal issues. But usually when those things get to the Supreme Court, it's usually us in an amicus brief role as opposed to the primary attorney.
How effective is an amicus brief? Because you file I refer to it as a friendly letter to the court.
Amicus briefs can be extremely effective. And I'll give you a great example. When we were involved in the lawsuit to sue the city of Phoenix about 2 years ago when they were refusing to deal with the crime associated with rampant homelessness out in the zone. And for people who may not be familiar with the zone, that was an area in downtown Phoenix, largest homeless encampment in the entire country, and also the largest concentration of crime anywhere in the country. So we sued Phoenix along with some other attorneys under the auspices that what they were doing had created a public health hazard and a nuisance. And it was that amicus brief, that argument, that the Supreme Court latched onto and actually ruled in our favor. So really it was the amicus brief that won the day.
Wow. So it's got some teeth to it then.
Yes. Amicus briefs can be very, very effective. And we've seen that in a multitude of lawsuits.
So your namesake, the Goldwater Institute, famously named after Barry Goldwater himself, the first. Barry Goldwater Jr., still alive and kicking, I believe is on your board of directors as well.
He is on the board.
If Goldwater was alive today, what would he say about this legacy you have continued for him?
I think he would be over the moon proud of what we've done. And when the Goldwater Institute was started, it was back when Senator Goldwater, he had just recently stepped out of the public spotlight, stopped running for office. And he was approached by a few business folks out here just to start a small think tank with his namesake. He was happy to give his blessing. I think he would be very pleasantly surprised at how we've grown and how that work has expanded all across the country, and also kept very true to the principles of Senator Goldwater, and that is a limited government, a system of federalism, and keeping the government out of Americans' lives, which was very important to him.
And I mean, his book, Conscience of the Conservative, is still the #1 bestseller for young intellectuals looking to read about his philosophical viewpoints. Are you guys still pushing a lot of that narrative as well publicly?
Absolutely. Yes. And really the conscience of a conservative, it really is the backbone of everything we do. And the ideas proffered by Senator Goldwater for decades they haven't lost their resonance today in 2025. In fact, I would argue they're probably more important than ever.
I would agree. Victor, switching gears to you. Why are you doing this? You had a career at the Arizona State Legislature. You have a business background. You could be doing a lot more and making a lot more money than what the charitable space offers. I mean, you're running an $11.5 million company. Why? Why are you doing this?
Well, it's funny. It's funny that you ask that. My wife asks me that sometimes as well. I've gotten some very good offers over the years from corporations, from corporate America, to whether it's in senior management positions, government relations, that type of work. And as tempting as they are, I do think you have to follow your passions at the end of the day. And to me, I would much prefer to be fighting for school choice, to be fighting against high taxes, to be fighting against government regulations, to be fighting for parental rights and healthcare freedom. And so it's what I'm passionate about. And every day I'm very fortunate that I get to go to work and do things that I care very deeply about and that I can see are having an impact across the country, whether it's with school choice, whether it's with right to try. I mean, these are having tangible impacts. And for me, at least, that's my passion, and I'd like to do something that is as impactful as possible. I'm very happy that there are corporations out there. They're critical. They create jobs and drive the economy. But for me, my focus is on changing public policy, and that's where it's going to stay.
And where does that passion come from?
It really does come from. I mentioned that 1992 election.
Yeah.
When the 1992 election came around, I was not real familiar with what the difference was between a conservative or a liberal, what socialism was, capitalism. But as I started getting into it and reading about it, and I started reading guys like Bill Buckley and Thomas Sowell, who was just a tremendous influence on my life, in economics and history, it was just became something I fell in love with, and fortunately that love still exists today.
Okay. Anything else you want to say?
No, other than I really appreciate you having me on, and if there's one thing I would just leave people with, it's that never forget that freedom is the most important gift that this country has given to us. The government is the most coercive force in the country, and if we want more freedom, we need less government.
Victor, the government's been shut down for a couple weeks now.
Sure.
I feel like we haven't really missed a beat. All my flights have been on time. They've landed appropriately. There's not meatballs falling from the sky, and teachers are still at work. Do we need this massive government? Is this an example of why it needs to shrink because it's so unnecessary?
I couldn't agree with you more, and I do think that, and this is something that politicians don't appreciate because they live both on the right and the left. They live in this political bubble where they think everything they're talking about is what's being talked about around dinner tables. And I do think the government shutdown highlights how little the government, in fact, really does, because very few lives have actually changed during this government shutdown. And I think it's important to remember that the whole impetus for the shutdown was because elements of Congress wanted to spend more money at a time when we're already running massive deficits. And so
we can say Democrats too, because they're the ones that are preventing from us getting back in business. But go on.
No, you're absolutely right. So yes, I think the government shutdown, such as it is, highlights that in fact we do not need a massive bloated government. And if there is one issue that in my opinion is more important than any other at the federal level, it is to actually balance the budget. I mean, we have to get out of debt. We should not be deficit spending. We need to balance the budget. There's nothing more important to the future of this country's economy than getting ourselves out of debt and stop deficit spending, which is crazy. People should not, I mean, your average family does not spend more money than it takes in.
No.
The least we can ask of our government is that they do the same thing.
Do you think Trump and Republicans will continue to hold the line going into next week? Because a recent article claimed how air traffic controllers are going on more than 2 weeks of no pay now. And Trump made an announcement there might be issues.
I'm always hesitant to look into a crystal ball because as a guy that spent 20 years working in politics at the state level, you could have an almost insurmountable problem on Monday and then it's solved on Tuesday.
Yeah.
The agreement is made, the deal is cut. I personally do not believe the government shutdown is going to last that much longer. I think in all likelihood there will be some Democrats that come together with the Republican majority, and I do think they'll find an end to this shutdown probably by the end of next week.
Victor, it's funny you say that because John Fetterman actually came out saying that this is basically a crime against humanity, that Democrats won't just come to the table and get things moving again because it's a good budget Republicans are proposing, in my opinion. But when you have people like that who Democrats rally behind and now he's turning against them in a way, you think it's going to affect his reelection?
I'm sure that he's going to have a primary challenge, but he's really doing a populist approach in a state where I think that can be very effective. And I think a lot of people, myself included, were not sure what we were going to get out of John Fetterman, but the truth is he's been a very effective politician. He's been an honest politician, and I think a lot of his positions are things that folks can rally around. And certainly his position on the government shutdown is the same position that I would have.
Yeah. Even though now a lot of Democrats are calling Trump is committing crimes against humanity because so many families are going unfed. I just wonder, is there any truth to that? Especially in Arizona, soup kitchens are still open.
Yes, they've tried to make this a big issue over these SNAP payments.
Yes.
I haven't seen any data at all that indicates that anyone's lives have changed as a result of these SNAP payments. And so I don't really think it's a campaign issue that the Democrats think it is. Now I do think that when you start potentially messing around with people's travel plans around Thanksgiving and work travel plans building up to the holidays and between the holidays, I do think that's the type of things that Americans are going to get very upset about if that's not addressed fairly soon.
Oh, yeah. No, they're going to be pissed. I have 4 flights next week, and God forbid one of them is canceled.
I have a flight to New York, and I'm not going to be real thrilled if
No.
if that flight gets
You
canceled.
could have dinner with Mondami out there and talk to him about his wonderful budget.
I have a feeling he wouldn't want to meet with me.
No, I don't think so, because you guys might sue him.
There's a very high probability that will happen in the not too distant future.
Do you think you'll engage in any lawsuits in New York?
I think there's I'm talking to folks out there. I mean, we'll see how the next year or so goes, but I would say there's a very good chance you'll see us suing the city in New York sometime over the next year or two.
I sincerely hope that you do. Thank you for joining the American Conversation.
Thank you, Austin. I really appreciate it.